All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Siglin. I'm actually the co-founder of a business and technology development firm, Transitions, Inc., also contributing editor for both Streaming Media Magazine Europe and Streaming Media Magazine in the United States. As you can see here, we have 4 panelists, and we're going to be talking about MPEG DASH. The way we're going to do this is we're going to do brief introductions, and then we've got a few slides to kind of talk about the history of why we've needed DASH and where we stand at the moment. We're going to talk about the opportunities, and then we're going to talk about some of the challenges. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to change slide sets. All right, we'll start with Cornelia. So Cornelia, if you'll tell us just briefly about your company.
We are based in Germany, but we're working international. My name is Cornelia Patzelsperger. As you hear, I'm definitely German. We are a technical solution provider for all kind of IPTV stuff, integration parts. We own a little CDN, but we are working with the big players as well. So sometimes we do live streaming with Limelight. We are working very international. So we have offices in Jacksonville as well, and there is the US business done, and we are more into the backend processes. So MPEG DASH is for us a really interesting topic because we are always taking care about encoding stuff for our customers as well, and so we always have to face many different problems, and we have to solve many different problems because of the fail of standardization. So this is about our company.
All right, very good. Paul?
Okay, I'm Paul Stallard. I'm from Ericsson. Ericsson, as you know, very large company, 100 and something thousand people around the world. A lot of those people are working on mobile infrastructure and mobile telephone infrastructure in particular. I work for a piece of Ericsson which concentrates on our TV and media solutions. We have solutions that range from compression hardware, so we make MPEG 2, MPEG 4 and HEVC encoders. We make various pieces of software infrastructure for TV manufacturers or TV providers as well. So we make a content management system, various pieces of the infrastructure for video on demand back office and those types of pieces as well. And we address really the whole of the TV market. So traditionally, obviously, that's been satellite, the cable and the telco providers. In the direct-to-home market, we also work a lot with the studios and content providers in the business-to-business world as well, providing professional video from source through to the studios in the sort of pre-production phase as well. And then more and more today, both from our established customers and from new customers, we're getting more and more involved in the multi-screen and the OTT world as well. So that's
very good. Tristan?
Yeah. You don't have a slide for me.
I'm sorry.
I'm jealous. No, kidding. So I'm Tristan Letert from Anevia in France. We are a software company, 60 people. We started doing video on demand servers for IPTV, and a few years ago we invested massively in the OTT space, so to support the multi-screen. So we saw going from RTSP IPTV to mobile 3G PP, and then the Adobe smooth streaming, Apple HLS, and now we feel that MPEG DASH has gained a lot of interest in the industry and very concrete questions from telcos and broadcasters. So we deploy our technology so that telcos and broadcasters offer multi-screen services, so live video on demand, catch-up TV.
And if I remember correctly from yesterday, Tristan, you were involved personally in VLC for quite some time as well.
Yeah, I was the founders of Anevia. We were developer of the VLC media player that probably some of you or many of you use. And I was a project leader of that almost 10 years ago.
Fantastic. Alex.
So I'm Alex Zambelli. I'm a senior technical evangelist for Microsoft Media Platform. At Microsoft, we make a number of products that are on-premises products for media delivery. Most importantly, IIS media services, which for the past several years we've been using for delivery of smooth streaming media. We also support a number of app development platforms such as Windows, Windows Phone, Xbox, Silverlight. We also make content protection technologies such as Play-Ready DRM. For the past year or so, we've been building our cloud media delivery technologies called Windows Azure Media Services, and we're moving a lot of our on-premises media delivery technologies into the cloud, and we hope to ship this by the end of the year.
Okay, very good. So one of the things Alex did yesterday was actually a presentation on MPEG DASH as part of the Video Infrastructure Summit, and I asked him if I could steal a few of his slides as context. This one, actually just run through the animation very quickly. Of course, you know, we started kind of with a progressive download model. We moved to traditional streaming and added things like trick play, obviously pushing out packets. And then as we've moved into adaptive streaming, how many people here are not familiar with adaptive streaming? Okay. We moved into adaptive streaming with the ability to actually look at both changing bit rates as well as resolutions in some cases. I guess I have to do multiples on these, Alex, don't I? You warned me this slide actually had a lot of... All right, so one of the things that Alex made a very good point on is why do we need adaptive streaming? And if people are familiar with it, of course, the concept of looking at how the networks are intermittent, how bandwidth rates rise and fall, looking for modern architecture, or looking at how to fit within a modern architecture. Move Networks, of course, started doing it in 2007. Microsoft with smooth streaming, Apple with HTTP live streaming, or what we know as HLS, and then Adobe coming in with dynamic streaming, or HDS. So in terms of the looking at all those different adaptive formats, there were some similarities and some differences, and one of the ideas in the industry was to look at how to move toward a standardization of it. And we sort of have two models. With HLS, of course, it's MPEG-2 transport stream, and with smooth streaming, and to a certain extent dynamic streaming, it was the ISO-based media file format, FMP4, with XML. You can see here, obviously, Microsoft with PIF, which then was used by DECE, and has now become what's called the common file format. And throughout the day, we may refer to things as CFF, and then there's also CSF, which we'll talk about a bit later. But one thing to remember as you start looking at the standards for DASH is that DASH actually is fairly lockstep with DECE and ultraviolet, because there are things like common encryption schemes that work between them. In the primary piece here on this is DASH, or Dynamic Adaptive Streaming over HTTP, was 90 experts from 50 companies working over the course of 2 years. One thing, and we'll talk about this a bit later too, is you notice Apple is listed as one of the companies on here. Apple has HLS, but they actually were one of the contributors to the specification, and we'll talk about what that means to the impact of the future later. And then, of course, ultimately when we went through the process, we got to a completed standardization or ratification in late 2011, and you'll notice, for instance, as I mentioned, common encryption, that actually goes back and forth between what DECE is doing and what DASH is doing. And then this last bullet at the bottom, still more work to be done. There are a number of things that are not in the DASH specification. On the other hand, one of the things is that DASH is a framework. So Cornelia provided a nice overview saying, you know, why do you use Dash? It technically makes sense, better video quality, and potentially less video delivery. Cornelia, do you want to talk a little bit to the points around cacheable HTTP, transport, and codec agnosticism?
Yeah, we always facing the problem in serving our customers that video is not available on all devices. And you have actually right now the different adaptive bitrate streaming technologies like Microsoft, Adobe, and the Apple technology. We are always facing the problem that they're nearly up to 80% similar, but there is a lack of 20%. And you always have to have a look at the video, at the codec, and you have to go a step deeper. And this is a big problem if you have to do it 3 times, or if you can't, if you don't have a standard where you can rely on. This is our main problem in this topic. Besides that it makes sense, it's cacheable. You don't have the RTP protocol, like they have to connect to a server. You can use the cache system as well. So for big video delivery, it makes sense in this way as well. And these are the 2 main
points
from our daily business that we have to face.
Very good point. So Paul, obviously Ericsson's been heavily involved, you know, as we've gone into the ratification process. What are, from your standpoint, I mean, you're not Adobe, you're not Microsoft, you're not Apple in terms of having the different formats. What do you see that Dash solves that the proprietary solutions didn't address?
Yeah, there are some specific technical advantages we get from Dash. Talked about the common encryption, for example. But I think the overriding thing that our customers are keen to do is to simplify the systems that they're currently delivering. So they, as was just mentioned, they need to provide video to all of these different devices and a growing number of devices, and just the overhead of having to produce the different formats and the different and to be able to make sure that all those different systems are working correctly is an overhead they don't need, frankly. So we're very much behind Dash, and been members of the promoters group along with many other companies as well, because we see Dash as a way of helping to simplify the infrastructure and ultimately make it a cheaper and more profitable business for those people who are delivering content.
Okay, very good. And then Tristan, from your standpoint, again, not being one of the the major 3 players, what did your company see as the benefit of Dash that it solved that the proprietary solutions didn't?
Well, the good thing before Dash is that all the formats from Adobe, Apple, Microsoft, and at some point Google were based on HTTP, which is good, and all the adaptive streaming mechanism of having several different bitrates. So everybody was doing that. Everybody was based on H.264 as well, except Google, who was based on VP8, and now Google WebM, the protocol promoted by Google at that time, hasn't taken off. We can even say that it's completely dead. So all these protocols had many things in common. So the work of the Dash committee was probably, or the industry was probably easier because there was a common philosophy. And of course, everybody, all the telcos, all the broadcaster, they don't understand all that, and they are really afraid about investing, and they may even delay investments because they don't understand, is it going to be a Microsoft or Apple or whoever is going to win. So they are really worried about that. So the effort of MPEG Dash was, first of all, a strong marketing message for many people, and I'm really glad that, for example, many companies promoted that, and I think it's really important for the industry in general to help telcos and broadcasters to invest, saying we are all agree, or at least we seem to all agree. There are slight differences, but we are all together, and I think that's a very strong message of the global industry.
Okay, very good. Alex, if you'll help me, let's walk through quickly these 3 slides. So I'll actually let you kind of drive from that side, and I'll just move the slides.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, the following few slides just kind of try to explain what Dash is and what it isn't, because a lot of people are confused about what the actual standard try to cover. And so Dash is really a framework standard. Some might call it an enabler standard, because it defines certain things. Really what it defines when we get down to the specifics is it defines the media presentation description, MPD, which is a document, an XML document that describes what's in the asset, how many bit trays exist, how many different presentations, how many languages, what kind of subtitles. So it really just describes the content itself. And then the other thing that's defined by the standard is the segment format. And that's essentially the syntax of the HTTP requests and responses. And so it really describes, here's how you request segments, and here's what you get back. But it doesn't really go down into the detail of what's necessarily inside of those segments that come back. So the only exception to that rule is that the standard does actually specify two file formats that are both MPEG supported file formats. And that's the ISO-based media file format and the MPEG 2 transport stream. So it does go into specifics of the file format, but really everything else is kind of out of spec. So if we go to the next slide, I guess that is actually,
Yeah,
so if you,
right.
let's go on back, sorry. So the things that it does not specify are things like codecs. There's actually no mention in the MPEG Dash spec about which codecs to use. So from that perspective, it can be said that it's codec agnostic. That said, being an MPEG spec, it is friendly to MPEG codecs. So things like H.264 and then looking into the future, HEVC and H.265 are all compatible with the MPEG Dash spec. It does not go into details about which resolutions to use, which bit rates to use, or even which DRM protection schemes to use. The DRM protection schemes are covered by another spec, which is a common encryption spec. And all these details, which is really what truly makes up interoperability, are defined in what's known as application profiles. And so even though the Dash specification has been ratified and published, it is really just the first step. The next step in achieving interoperability with Dash is defining an application profile that everyone agrees on that says, here are the codecs that are supported both on the video side and on the audio side. Here's the various DRM schemes that are supported. And right now there is an effort within the Dash industry forum, which is a Dash supporters group, to define something called Dash 264. And this is a Dash application profile based on H.264 video codecs, and then audio codecs such as AAC, Dolby Digital, DTS, and various other MPEG codecs.
And we'll come back to Dash 264 in a couple minutes. I'm just going to leave this up. So this basically allows you to see how what would the profile look like. And if you notice, for instance, at the bottom we have on-demand profiles, we have live profiles as well. And this is key because of the fact that we have different ways to set up a profile to deliver, whether it's live or on-demand. So a question for the panel as a whole. Based on the things that I've seen when it comes to interoperability, at least, the greatest short-term need seems to be Dash-compliant players. First of all, curious if each of the panelists agrees that that's the greatest short-term need, and if not, what other short-term needs you have. And then secondly, will we see a cohesion around one or two major Dash-compliant players, or will there be 15 or 20 out there to choose from? And Cornelia, I'll start with you.
In our point of view, there will be nearly as much players, as many players as it is right now, and you will have MPEG Dash implemented in JW as well, as Flash already mentioned. So it's on the roadmap, and there will be many players, and maybe this is a competitive thing for the market, so that the people are investing and investigating in the technology to go ahead with that. We won't have one big player, and that's it.
Okay.
because everybody has different aims to go forward with the technology.
Paul, your take?
Yeah, I think it clearly is one of the limiting factors at the moment, the lack of players and end devices. But we are seeing a lot of activity in that area at the moment. We're working with because we supply some of the transcoding and the segmenting pieces of the solution. A lot of the people who are working on the players come to us because they want streams to be able to test, and so we're exposed to that market, even though we're not specifically developing things for the clients ourselves. So we're seeing the chip manufacturers for mobile phone chipsets starting to add that functionality, and players around in virtually all the devices that you can imagine. So I think that we will see over the next certainly over the next year, we'll see an explosion of devices which are capable of or explosion of players which are able to show dash. And I think I agree that there probably will be a lot of them to begin with.
And because you're exposed to so many different players and the potential there, obviously as we see on the slide, we've got base media file format, we've got MPEG 2TS. Do you see that most of the players are being written for one or the other, or are there players that are combining the two together in terms of profiles?
I think that in most cases the file, the MPEG-4 file format is looking like a more popular format for Dash. So you could imagine that we might end up in a situation where the file format type adaptive streaming will end up in a Dash type solution, and maybe HLS will continue down its transport stream route for the time being. But I think that's the way we see it at the moment.
Okay, all right. Tristan, what's your company's take?
Yeah, I share the view that there will be one reference player per device, probably per phone or per type of operating system. I was very disappointed not to see Dash support in iOS 6. But yes, I think the natural way for each player vendor will be to implement the profile that is just a very small move from their existing TS for Apple or MPEG-4 for players like Microsoft or Adobe. So I think we will end up with two categories of player, and I don't expect many players to embrace all the profiles. However, we see a lot of activity. Also many people are developing the players, so I expect in 6 to 12 months having like hundreds of Dash players in mobile phone, connected TVs and so on, and after the natural selection will be done and end up with a very limited number of players.
So Alex, obviously your company makes a browser, and one of the questions that I've heard consistently is, okay, players are nice, but what about the ability to do it in a browser? You may not be able to share future plans, obviously, but do you suspect, or does Microsoft suspect, that what we're looking at in the natural selection that Tristan's talking about, that ultimately it will drop back to browser-based players as opposed to standalone players or even plugins?
Well, I mean, browser's definitely an important part of it. It's not, I think, the only really destination, the only delivery destination these days. Obviously, there's also native apps for a lot of the platforms as well. But as far as the browsers go, I think the big question in everyone's mind is whether this is going to go into the HTML5 video standard or not. And there is work underway right now in W3C to try to address both the lack of adaptive streaming as well as the lack of DRM in HTML5. And yeah, I think the proposal that they're kind of leaning towards right now is really adding a sort of a media stream source type of API to HTML5 that would allow really flexibility in adding even not just Dash, but even other support for other adaptive streaming formats to HTML5, so they can be implemented in just JavaScript. And then on the DRM front, I think they're looking at common encryption as a possibility of something that might add to HTML5. But of course, the road to that is pretty slow, as it typically goes with most standardization efforts. So it might be several years before we see that even, added and ratified, and then of course implemented. In the meantime, we might have to stick with plugins such as Flash and Silverlight for browser delivery, and then for mobile device delivery, or really any other application development platform, stick with actual native apps. So developing native apps for iOS, for Windows Phone, for Android, for Xbox, for Windows, whatever it is.
So effectively, if it took us 2 years on the Dash side for ratification, 3-4 years out, maybe with W3C?
I think that's probably realistic. We're looking at, I would say, 3 to 4 years out. So it's not something that I would expect to see in the next year. I mean, even if it was ratified tomorrow, the question, of course, still remains: how long would it take for it to be implemented, and then which browsers would support which, let's say, Dash profiles, which codecs, and so on. So it's not really an easy question that can be answered, and of course, it's not something that can be enforced either, because it's up to every browser vendor to do whatever, to kind of pick and choose what they want to implement. But just going back to one of the questions that was sort of brought up before about which of the Dash profiles might end up getting supported more than the others, it's not uncommon with standards, especially MPEG standards, to see only certain profiles of a standard implemented. And I think a good example of that is actually H.264, where if you look at the H.264 specification, there's about I think at least 5 or 6 different profiles specified that go all the way up to like high profile 444 and monochrome profile and so on. But in reality, it's really just baseline, main, and high 420 that end up getting implemented most of the time. And you almost have to go and look for very specific vendors that offer the other profile implementations. So it's not entirely uncommon for a standard to be out there that specifies many profiles, but only 1 or 2 get picked up.
And that begs the question, I'll throw this open to anybody on the panel. Somebody had mentioned to me yesterday after the presentations, they said, effectively what it seems like we're looking toward is almost just, rather than having multiple channels of audio to choose, say, different languages, we're really kind of going to the first implementation of players being stereo. So AAC with H.264 especially, and we'll talk about Dash 264 in a bit. Paul, maybe specifically to you again, because you see so many players, do you see companies looking to implement more than just stereo audio, to implement multiple tracks of audio like the framework allows for?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of both supporting multi-track audio, but also supporting multiple languages,
multi-tracking
languages as well. That's one of the advantages you get with the solutions. We can provide some sort of late binding of the audio and provide the right audio for the target audience.
Okay. Anybody else in terms of kind of seeing implementations around more than just a single set of stereo audio?
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility. I think what we're going to see is mostly AAC being used for stereo audio delivery, and Dolby Digital Plus or DTS being used for surround sound delivery. As far as different bill rate support of audio goes, I think we might see that as well, but that's a little bit more difficult to implement just because it can be sort of intrusive if you switch audio qualities at the same time as video qualities. So we might see like still a single bitrate audio approach prevail, but we'll definitely see stereo and multi-channel audio supported.
Okay. So the next question that I'd ask the panelists to talk about is interoperability, and Alex mentioned the Dash 264. I come out of video conferencing as part of my background, and when H323, which included H.264 in the early days, long before streaming, when that came out, it took us quite some time, almost 6 years, to kind of get to interop between endpoints. The question that I've got in the Dash world is, given the fact that we have these multiple profiles, given the fact that we've got the base media file format, MP4, and transport stream, what are the primary challenges in interoperability and how do we address those? And Alex, I'll start with you. If you want to define a little more on Dash 264 to kind of say why the industry forum is doing that from an interop standpoint.
Yeah. So the industry forum is a group that started out, it was known as the Dash Promoters Group originally, Dash PG, and when they grew past about 30, 40 members, they realized it was really an industry forum at that point that had the ability to go out and actually solve some of the interoperability problems around Dash instead of just promoting Dash. And so there's a working group within the Dash Industry Forum that's the Interoperability Working Group, and their goal is to define an application profile that restricts the profile down to the details such as codec, DRM schemes, and so on, that would achieve actual true interoperability. And so the result of this is something known as Dash 264. And as the name suggests, it is based on H.264 as the video codec, and then on the audio side, it specifies AAC, AC3, actually I think it might be enhanced AC3, DTS, and MPEG audio as the audio codecs. And then it goes into some additional details around common encryption, and it doesn't lock down things like resolution necessarily, but it is enough to actually achieve true interoperability. And the file format that it's based on is the ISO-based media file type, or the fragmented MP4.
Okay. Tristan, from your standpoint, what interoperability issues do you see out there, and how do we address those?
Well, today, the interop issue that we have is that everybody's developing, so our engineers at Anivia, for example, they're looking for players, are looking for connected TVs supporting Dash, they are looking for scrambling DRM companies implementing their own. So as we are speaking right now, everybody's developing at the same time. So, but eventually everything will get together, and I think the main risk that we can see in terms of interop is that we may, of course, end up with two different philosophy, MPEG TS and MPEG fragmented MPEG-4. I think fragmented MPEG-4 has a lot of traction and will be the main profile, although the MPEG-2 TS will be asked by some broadcasters for supporting legacy set-top boxes and so on. So I think it's not dead for legacy, but will disappear. So this creates interoperability problems. I'm also afraid about profiles. At Anivia, we saw all the RTSP history of video on demand, and RTSP was supposed to be a standard, but we ended up doing a specific implementation of RTSP for every set-top box. So because a slight difference, so we ended up with maybe 50 to 100 RTSP profiles. So of course, I don't want that to happen to Dash.
And we've seen that even with Android devices, the different implementations of RTSP. So Paul, Ericsson touches a lot of the value chain across many areas. Where do you see the biggest interoperability issues today?
Well, I think to a large extent it's already been mentioned. We've got such a big space here that the only way we're going to get interoperability is if we can narrow it down to some specifics. So I think the Dash 264 initiative, I think it's market driven. It's pushing the industry to define an application profile which is the one that people want. The H.264 gives us the best video quality that people can get in a given bit rate. It supports the audio codecs that are widely used today. So I think that will help us. I mean, we have seen a lot of it already in these sort of early days, where almost every time we work with a new client, something changes somewhere and something's done slightly differently. So the sooner we can get to a narrower definition of an application profile, the better.
Cornelia?
I agree.
That's easy enough.
So I think there's nothing left to add on. It's still the case that you have the HTML5 topic, that there is no standardization, so we will focus on that. And if you have a standard in this part, it's a big big chance to go ahead with other developments which are really, really important for the market to
And
earn money and to deliver the best way.
And you provided a slide that has these three things, which segues very nicely into the last question to the panel, which is, you know, what are the ongoing challenges? What things aren't solved? Could you kind of address these three things?
Yes, the desktop players right now, the HTML5 desktop players that don't support MPEG Dash, and this will be a problem. This will be a problem to use MPEG Dash all over and on all devices, but maybe there are some changes in the market in the future.
And then what about the royalty-free comment that you made?
Yeah, you never
down here?
know which codec will be charged for using it. You never know if MPEG Dash will be royalty-free. This is a topic where most of the big elephants who are sitting next to each other and talking to each other, like Adobe and Microsoft, they aren't really on one. They don't agree with each other because Adobe doesn't say that they won't charge maybe for codecs, etc.
Alex, do you want to? I know you want to respond. Would you?
Well, I know that. So there's
Yeah.
two parts of that. I mean, the codecs are kind of a whole separate issue because whatever licensing is applicable to H.264 today will
Yes.
be still applicable to it, whether it's within Dash or within smooth streaming or within HDS or HLS. I mean, that doesn't change it. So those the same rules apply there. As far as licensing for Dash itself as a specification goes, I know several companies have already said, Microsoft included, that they will not charge any Dash royalties. So basically a lot of the companies that have contributed to Dash that might have patents in any part of that specification have said we're not going to charge royalties for those patents.
So we won't down the line see a royalty off of PIF or something like that.
Exactly, yeah. So unless, you know, some company emerges out of nowhere and says, oh, well, we have a patent in there that nobody has claimed, but so far that hasn't happened. It's unlikely to happen because everyone who was contributing to Dash is a part of the Dash industry forum. So it's really in nobody's interest to charge royalties for Dash itself. But I mean, codec licensing, that will still remain, you know,
Yes,
the
and
same issue
I
as
think it
it's been.
depends on how much the charge is and up to which level the charge is important, or you wanna charge the customer. So these are mainly the broadcast topics and not the little.
Yeah, I mean, it won't
customers.
change delivery to any of the platforms that support H.264 today. So if we're talking about delivery to whether it's iOS devices or Android devices or whether it's Windows or Mac OS, right? All these platforms already support H.264. And so if there's already HLS being delivered to these platforms or smooth streaming or HDS, it wouldn't be any different for Dash. Basically the same royalties would apply.
So effectively, we can say, while the royalty issues around 264 remain, there's nothing added in the Dash framework.
Exactly.
Okay. And Paul, you also had a slide with some of the challenges. Do you want to speak to a couple of these?
Yeah, I mean, this was really just to put some context on what we're talking about with Dash, really. And these are just some of the challenges that our customers come to us with when they're talking about deploying a multi-screen solution, whether that's in addition to a pay TV solution they already have, or whether it's a company who are looking to deploy something that's a pure OTT solution. And I think the point here is that, you know, people are when they're looking at making a compelling multi-screen solution, they're worried about what their video quality is like. They're worried about getting the reach in terms of network reach and in terms of device reach as well. Making sure they can adapt to different network conditions, which is why, you know, we see so much move towards adaptive bit rates. But also how they can monetize it. You know, what they can do about creating advertising around it, or what other sort of merchandising opportunities are there around multi-screen, and all of these things really. You know, how do we start bringing multi-screen to mobile devices and those sorts of things? And really, none of these problems is about the packaging format of the video. So ultimately, I think from both the consumer and the operator of these services, they would all benefit from a simplification here that would allow us to remove some of the complexity we have now, creating all these different formats, having all this different information stored in CDNs, having different ways of manipulating manifests if you want to do ad insertion, all those things that make things more difficult. It would make the solution easier for the multi-screen provider and ultimately better for the consumer if we could start to simplify that. And hence why we're so keen to see Dash be a success.
Okay, very good. Before I open it up for questions from the audience, any other challenges that we see need to be addressed? I think multiple DRMs is one that has come up as well. It's obviously, Alex, you guys have PlayReady, but there are servers like what Aryan's doing at Code Shop where we're trying to address the ability to do multiple DRM schemes. Are there other challenges beyond that we see?
I think it's much more cost effective if you don't have to look at the little thing over there in the background, and if you can concentrate on the main things to earn money, to deliver it the best way, to have a really good quality. This is definitely a main topic. And the B2B customer doesn't understand why it's so complex. You always have to explain, yes, but you have H.264, but H.264 is not H.264. And I think there's a very good way to have a better customer communication in the B2B sector and in the B2C sector as well, because they never heard about different codecs and different specifications. I think this is one big challenge.
Okay. Anybody else?
Maybe what we're expecting from Dash right now is clarifying a bit all the subtitle. We talked about multi-audio.
Subtitling, sure.
So now that the system layer codec seems to be pretty much controlled, now we're moving into the other step, multi-audio, subtitling, multi-DRM and so on. This is what we've done in the IPTV and DVB world, dealing with metadata, EPG, simulcrit, sorry. We have to do that in OTT and with Dash. That's the next move, I think.
And you also mentioned, Tristan, earlier about broadcasters being hesitant to invest. I think back to when the DVD player was created. One of the ideas there in a standardization was to be able to allow monetization as well as investment in the infrastructure. Do you sense that there's money sitting on the sideline waiting for something like this from a standardization standpoint, especially as we look at things like the common streaming format beyond just the common file format? And maybe, Paul, that's a question to you as well, because you obviously sell equipment into broadcasters.
Well, it's going faster. I think DVB took almost 10 years to get together. IPTV was, I would say, 5 years. I think OTT is going very fast. We've seen that. I haven't seen the DVB. I was too young, but I've seen the IPTV and the OTT, and it's going very fast. And we see a real wave of investment. And Dash is helping that because there is a common message in the industry. So we see a lot of, so I think people are investing in existing technology. So broadcaster in their RFPs, there is Apple, there is Microsoft, and they ask for Dash, but they don't start deploying with Dash, but they are confident that Dash will enable them to make a sustainable investment. So I think it's happening right now.
I think it's a similar point, really. It helps us remove a distraction, and ultimately that will make that will mean that the people providing the service are able to provide more of their energy in making a compelling service and making it more interesting. So hopefully that will grow the cake for everyone eventually.
Okay. All right. Very good. So I believe we have a wireless microphone. Is that correct for being able to do questions from the audience? Do we have a wireless mic back there? If anyone has a question, if you raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you. Actually, if you don't mind giving it to Andreas first.
Thanks. I have a question around the player side, actually, because I agree with Cornelia. The MPEG Dash is actually enabling service providers to simplify the encoding and the transportation side, and hopefully with Dash 264 we get more clear view what then the features that might be on the player side. But looking back at HLS, HDS, all the complication from a service provider was always, okay, they somehow implemented even their own implementation so far. So for example, having the ability to implement MPEG-2 user data or SIE data into the streams is fine, but the very moment the player vendors are not implementing ways to read that data, the whole specification is pretty useless to everybody. And that's, thank you for your comment on the browser side, but that is actually, it's an end-to-end experience, right? If I solve the delivery side, it's fine. If I use the codec side, it's fine. But the very moment there is no standard or no certifications for the players, we as a service provider end up exactly the same problem we have today, which means there will be a different implementation for MPEG-H264 vendor A, B, C, D, and E. And that's pretty much my question. Is there something, certification or standard, which goes actually beyond and saying if you, as a manufacturer, are producing an MPEG-264 ready device, that is the feature set you have to support beyond just playing audio and video? Because that's the biggest challenge for us. Audio and video probably everybody is doing, but that's just 80%, and the remaining 20% of the specification is usually 80% of the work. That's the reason why usually everybody stops there.
I think the MPEG committee,
The Dash Industry Forum?
No, the MPEG committee is meeting right now in Shanghai, and they are doing some work on Dash, and there are a few topics that they are dealing with. There is subtitling, there is low latency, and one of the topic that they will be discussing is creating a system compliance process or feeds maybe. So the only answer that I have is that this is a topic that is discussed in the MPEG, and that's an issue for the industry indeed to have compliance process or things like that. So maybe it's solved right now because maybe they discussed that yesterday, but
News doesn't travel so fast. Anybody else on that particular topic?
Well, I think because there is a lot of complexity around OTT delivery, that's both a minus and a plus. I think the advantage of it being so complex is that individual companies can go and implement rich players that basically innovate and add new features. But then, of course, the disadvantage is that it's not standardized. Because when you compare that to something like, let's say, the DVD standard or the Blu-ray standard, those deal with very specific scenarios that are very strictly defined. And so it's a lot easier to say this Blu-ray player is completely Blu-ray compatible and certified with all the content that's out there because it's dealing with a very specific set of scenarios. Whereas with OTT, what we see is that this year everyone's delivering, I don't know, HD with subtitles, but then next year somebody's like, oh, we're going to deliver multi-camera angles, and then the year after that somebody says, well, now we're going to add 3D, right? And so there's all these features constantly being added, and I think it's going to be very difficult really for any standard to nail those down into specifics. Because a lot of this delivery is happening to software application development platforms, the nice thing is that it's very easy to write libraries and frameworks and SDKs that deal with some of this in a very specific way and then share those. So hopefully maybe we'll solve this through just open source libraries that whether it's JavaScript or C# or Java that go and explain this is how you go build a player for Dash on this particular platform, and it supports subtitles, it supports multiple audio languages, and etc.
Other questions?
Hello? I think there was a slide up there that said MPEG Dash doesn't support live. Is that right? Did I see that? I didn't see that. Okay, good. Yeah, that's what I thought, yeah. Now, the question was, do you think So I kind of represent broadcasters, and broadcasters liked the idea of Dash because it looked like it was going to be transport agnostic and codec agnostic, and it doesn't look like it is going to be that anymore. Anyway, do you think Dash is going to be used more for platform adaptation, like you have a manifest file that serves different mobile platforms, different set-top boxes, or do you think it's more going to be used for bitrate adaptation due to network conditions? Which is the best application for it, do you think?
Well, I think we've seen both of those applications. So in an environment where it's a fixed bit rate, and actually you're not using the adaptive bit rate piece at all, but purely using it as a way of controlling the manifest, and then also yeah. So we've seen a few of those, but also very much using it in the adaptive sense as well. So I think both.
Hello, I'm interested in what we have for Dash now. Any kind of live encoders, video on demand encoders, and maybe some giants like Harmonic, NVIDIA, Digital Rapids, Elemental. Do they plan? Do they plan? Do they have a plan to implement Dash in their products?
Yeah, I would say it's happening for most part already.
It's happening right now.
Yeah.
You see it on the roadmaps of many key stakeholders in the industry.
And
It's MPEG Dash compatible. It shall be.
And I think what we've seen is they've all added adaptive, and now it's a matter of conforming it, because some of them had added HDS, some of them had added HLS, some of them had added smooth streaming. And as I see it, it's the question of getting them to conform back down to Dash itself.
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to just making sure that the file format that they're producing is compliant, and that they can produce MPD XML manifest that can describe the assets. So, but yeah, I mean, IBC was just in Amsterdam last month, and there was a lot of vendors that were exhibiting there. They were advertising themselves as being Dash compatible. Though I still think that the true meaning of that will, actually become valid when there's Dash 264 application profile. I think for right now, it's all sort of, okay, it's more of a future promise than anything else, I think.
And one wonders if it will be, I'm Dash compliant to a particular player, as opposed to I'm Dash compliant as a whole.
Well, I think it's the early stage of the evolution. So, we are producing products today which can support Dash, but unfortunately we're still at that early stage, and most of our customers buy that product and use it for HLS and not for Dash. So but it will support that, we just look forward to when we're providing more of them to do Dash than we are for doing other formats.
And I think it's a big commitment if everybody does that. If you feel it in the market that this will happen, that everybody agrees to this standard.
What about now? Do we have some products right now to work with Dash?
Well, there are servers that will actually, servers that will output Dash, some that are in beta or release candidate. On the encoder side, nobody that I know of yet is doing this Dash segmentation directly at the
So
encoder.
we have that within our products today. So we've been showing that. I think we showed it first at IPTV World Forum back in March here, actually, and then at IPC again we showed it again. So I think there are multiple people who have that technology today.
What we do as an AVI, it's a bit of commercial speech, but I don't want to get into that, but we provide packaging servers that are connected to encoders that convert existing HLS smooth streaming into Dash. So this is a way for people to gain time to market before all the encoder or their existing encoder support Dash. So we enable that. Otherwise, they can go to Ericsson and buy the SPR.
All right, other questions?
My name is Vlad, I'm from BSkyB. How do you see the future of ABR technologies? What do you think will happen with HDS and smooth streaming? Is it time for them to slowly die? And do you think that Dash is ready to replace those yet?
I think in the case of smooth streaming, it's going to be a gradual transition. I mean, right now we're still promoting smooth streaming as a way of delivering adaptive stream media today, really. But once we have Dash up and running and it's supported and we feel like there's an ecosystem out there for it, then I think we'll see a gradual transition away from smooth streaming over to Dash. Because, for example, Dash ISO live profile is very, very similar to smooth. It's probably about 95% there. So for us, it's not a difficult transition. And the whole point, I think, of both Microsoft and Adobe getting on board Dash is really to kind of say, you know, we're not going to forever support these proprietary technologies. We do want to be actually mutually compatible. So I think we will see a gradual transition now. I think when it's going to happen will depend a lot on the ecosystem itself, the market, and how quickly the market matures in terms of Dash compliance.
And Steve Allison yesterday from Adobe, actually, that question was asked, and he said that effectively, you know, they're adding Dash to all of their products. He didn't necessarily say that they're deprecating HDS yet. I think Microsoft's gone a little further in that, in saying, you know, especially because PIF became part of the standard.
Yeah, I mean, and HDS is kind of in the same boat. I mean, their HDS is very similar to the ISO live profile of Dash as well. So I think it's going to be a very smooth transition for them too. I know that in our case, you know, one of the things that we're planning on doing is providing backwards and forwards compatibility between Dash and Smooth, so that if you have Smooth assets, but you have a Dash client, that you have a way for that Dash client to actually request a Dash version of the Smooth asset.
Yeah, and that's the same case for Adobe as well, backwards and forwards compatibility. Okay, time for one final question. All right, let me ask the question that nobody's asked. So what does it take to get Apple to move from HLS to MPEG 2 TS, main or simple profile?
I think momentum, primarily momentum, and just industry agreement, really. Because I think if everyone's on board with Dash, then I think we talked about this a little bit yesterday. You know, I see the best case scenario is that Apple says, well, we'll do Dash as well, right? And they just get on board. And worst case scenario is that they continue doing HLS, but then we have Dash and HLS, which means we're down from 4 or 5 different adaptive streaming technologies to just 2. So that's really not that bad of an outcome, I suppose.
Okay. Anybody else have a take on that?
Same answer.
Okay. So we can't twist their arm. It's more the fact that everybody else is cohesive. If the rest of the industry is cohesive around Dash, then there's that sort of incentive for Apple.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't think there's, you know, anything necessarily in it for them to continue using HLS, because, I mean, they're not a server company. They don't sell servers. They don't really have any sort of investment in HLS as HLS. I think for them it's just a way of reaching their set of devices, the iOS devices. And so I think if they can accomplish that same thing with Dash, then I don't necessarily see why they wouldn't. But obviously I can't speak for them. So.
All right, very good. If you all would give our panelists a round of applause.